my legislation that passed last year called the Power Act,
Oh, right.
which is about more legal resources through pro bono work for survivors of domestic violence. And the first big Power Act summit is going to be in Anchorage tomorrow,
Oh, wow, okay, gotcha.
which happens to be my wife and mine's 25th wedding anniversary.
Aw.
But we want to make this a really big, successful event. It's the chief judge of the federal district court in Alaska who, by law, has to put on one of these summits for encouraging pro bono legal services. You might recall I did this as Attorney General 10 years ago. We had a great turnout. That was how we got the idea. So this law that was signed last year into law, my bill, the Power Act, requires every chief judge in the country, in the 96, I think, federal districts, to do one of these summits with the goal of literally having an army of lawyers who can go do this work. In Alaska, over the course of a couple of years, just through pressing it when I was AG and then the attorneys general after me, we had over 100 lawyers who signed up to do this, which is, think about that, that's tens of thousands of legal hours to.
Do you think that's just for one day only?
No, it's to take a case.
So that's what I was wondering, how is that different from like a victim's, like the DA's office here, for instance, they have a victim's representative?
Yeah.
So it's like with their office, but it is kind of an ally.
This is your lawyer, right? You get a lawyer, so the lawyer takes the case. So it's much more comprehensive and involved. And so, the reason this is so important, and I think we've talked about it, is because the studies show that and we can send you all the material on this, but literally, there's no panacea to solve what is a big problem in Alaska and nationally, but that the best way to get a victim survivor out of the cycle of violence that she often finds herself in is to get that person a lawyer. Because then they can get protective orders and they can use the law as kind of a shield and a sword. And that's what all the studies show. The problem is I think, and we have it in our materials, the National Center for, to Combat Domestic Violence, they said that, one day, I think it was like a couple of years ago, over 10,000 victims went without that kind of legal representation.
Right.
So you might remember, and I talked about this during my legislature speech.
Okay.
I've introduced the series of bills now that are moving through on my Choose Respect initiative nationally. But one of those is a bill that Senator Harris and I introduced, and this would essentially give a Sixth Amendment statutory right to counsel to victims.
Yeah.
So think about this. If you have somebody who is accused of rape, and he's indicted,
Right.
that guy gets a Sixth Amendment right to counsel, right? That's the Constitution. That's what the Supreme Court says. Okay, that's fine. But what does the victim get in that situation? Nothing. Okay, think about that.
No.
So my bill says if somebody's indicted, it triggers what would be a right to counsel for the victim.
And it's
which is
all
very
pro
needed.
bono?
No, it's a combo. It's a great question. It was the reason this took a while. It's pro bono. It's some funding, and there was a act in the 1980s is called the Protect Our Family Act before the Violence Against Women Act that came, that set up these councils. You know how Alaska has a council,
Yeah.
the Council on Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault. Those are actually kind of set up through federal law all throughout the country. Every state has one of those, and so it works through those states to get additional funding, pro bono work, and encouraging them to do the legal work too. So it's a pretty comprehensive approach. We think it's a big idea.
Yeah.
And this Power Act event tomorrow, which of course is going to be mostly Anchorage attorneys, but I just wanted people in Southeast to be aware of it because I did one of those pro bono legal summits in Juneau when I was Attorney General. We got a great turnout here. That was 10 years ago. So